So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the fall kickoff for the HSC Entrepreneurial Grand Rounds. So my name is Molly Wasco. I have a PhD in MIS and I am an academic entrepreneur. So I try and come up with new technology solutions that improve the lives of people and actually commercialize those and get them out into the marketplace. The goal of today, though, is not to tell you about my entrepreneurial journey, but to introduce you to a program called I-Corps that we hope will help turn you into an entrepreneur. And so today the topic is going to be I-Corps at NCATS and how we can, with the CTSA programs, actually accelerate discovery in life sciences where we're not only doing better science, but actually having a greater impact. And so if you look at our investments in science, we do really good over here on this side, especially with the CTSAs. So are we doing research right? Are we doing scientific projects that have rigor and reproducibility, transparency, pilot programs, that we have tremendous investments to ensure that we are making discoveries here on campus. However, that's only part of the translational picture. What we also have to be able to do is actually get the discoveries that emerge from campus and get them out into the communities. And the way to do that, the way to go from invention to impact, is really through commercialization. You need to have some type of commercialization plan in order for that translational step to actually occur. And unfortunately, what happens is that most of us are very comfortable with how to create better research and take on research projects. But when it comes to the process of commercialization, for most of us, that remains a black box. And so the goal of I-Corps is really to help discovery scientists better understand the commercial potential of the discoveries that they make on campus. And so the purpose behind I-Corps and the development of this program was really driven by the NSF, and they were trying to answer this question: how can we actually increase the economic impact of the research dollars that we invest every year? So NSF invests about $7 billion, but really when you look at the investments in NIH, it's $30 billion. And if you consider that as an R&D fund, we need to be able to better explain what is the return on that investment. And we need to be able to start sooner with our academic scientists to be thinking about that question. So here's what most of us think of when we think about commercialization. So all it really takes is some really super smart people. So here we have some scientists from Harvard, from MIT, from Stanford. They come up with this really cool discovery, of course, that has the potential to change lives. You toss a ton of money at it, so let's give them $50 million, and then hopefully some time will go by, and then all of a sudden it's a company and it's changing people's lives. Unfortunately, that is rarely the case. So what we have learned about startups over time is that taking this approach, investing in ideas and research teams, actually has a really big strikeout rate. So if you look at investments in startups, that this strikeout component is incredibly high. And what we used to think about with startups is what we need to do is be able to just pick the winners. How can we identify the winners? If we invest in 10 different companies, one of them will be a winner. And so really it's been about how do we pick the winning idea. But what we've discovered with this type of model is that the number one reason startups fail is because we're building a bunch of stuff that nobody wants. So we may think it's a cool idea, but when we actually get it out there in the hands of a user, a consumer, a customer, a patient, what we find is not really solving a problem that we have. And so the purpose of I-Corps is actually to try and de-risk some of this at the startup phase and reduce this curve. And the way we do this is actually by looking at our science from another lens to be able to see if we actually commercialize this, who would actually care? And so it's this idea of customer discovery. Before we even implement or go through or take an investment, are we confident that there's a market out there that really wants to adopt our idea? And so NSF started the I-Corps program back in 2012. And their approach was, rather than look at our portfolio, try and pick the winners and commercialize those, how can we move farther back in the pipeline? Can we put a program in place that actually trains our scientific investigators, our researchers, our clinicians to think about what is the commercial potential of their research as they're doing the research farther back in the pipeline. And so over the past 8 years or 6 years, they've put in place what they call this National Innovation Network. They've made a tremendous investment. And so far, they've actually had 43 courses. They've trained now over 1,000 teams. And what they've discovered is about a third of those teams actually go on to create companies. And so the success rate has been incredibly high. And the way they've structured it is they have given I-Corps grants to specific universities. So you can see these green little dots. These are called I-Corps sites. These are universities that run local programs. The sites are actually supported by these blue stickers or pointers. These are called nodes. The role of the node is to support the sites and then to provide access to I-Corps training to universities in their region that don't have a site through something called regional programs. The goal of this innovation network is to identify what are some of the best, most promising ideas emerging off of our campuses, and can we elevate them to the national program? So with the national program, they invest $50,000 in a specific I-Corps team to help them commercialize their idea. So right now, it's the premier federally funded program to support commercialization of research. And so the way I like to describe it, it doesn't replace how you think about your research. We still have to be able to do our research. But what an I-Corps program does, it actually gives you a different lens through which you can look at your research through the perspective of another, through the perspective of a potential customer. And so here's the first thing you need to know about customers. First of all, the big myth is that customers actually care about your science or your technology or your discovery. They don't. They don't care about your technology at all. What your customers really care about is how can they get their jobs done? How do they get their problems to go away? How do they get their dreams realized? And how do they make their pain go away? So the reality for customers is they want to achieve these types of goals, and they don't really care about what kind of technology or discovery or science they're going to use to be able to do that. And so we need to be thinking about our research, our science, in a different lens, from the lens of a customer and what is the value we actually create for them. So here's a good example. Typically when I ask a researcher, so tell me a little bit about your research, the answer is something that sounds like their scientific abstract or their specific research aims. I work on mitochondrial DNA damps, blah, 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 blah. And the response from a customer is something like this: bless your heart. By the way, in the South, that doesn't mean a good thing. That means, I don't get it, but keep talking. So the first trick, the first thing we try and teach people is to quit talking about your science. Put your science, your discovery, stick it in a box and put the box under the bed, and learn how to talk to people in terms that they understand. So going back to that other conversation, tell me about your research. Well, I help people regain their well-being and mental health. That opens up a conversation with a potential customer. Oh, tell me how. Well, I do research, typically that's funded by NIH, and we have a research lab where we're trying to discover new drugs. Really? Oh, yes. And the way I do that is I work on something called mitochondrial DNA. So just having a different perspective to open that conversation about your research, the value it brings to a potential customer, that creates a lot of value from their perspective. So the I-Corps program has been so incredibly successful that other funding agencies have really started paying attention. So you can see NSF had a $7 billion investment in research, but compared to NIH spends $30 billion. What is the return? And so right now, if you're an NIH-funded researcher, the only way you can participate in an I-Corps program is actually if you already have an SBIR or STTR. So NIH has a program where if you have received an SBIR or STTR from NIH, then you're invited to apply to I-Corps. The challenge with this, though, is you already have to have a company. And already having having a company in place is a little bit too late to discover whether or not you have a business model. So a team of us from the CTSAs, we have 9 different institutions, we've been working over the past 2 years to develop a program, an I-Core program, that's specific to life sciences and that leverages our CTSA network. So we have participants that are scientists, that are business people, that are engineers. We've also partnered with the national SBIR team, so we have national instructors on board to be able to help us develop the curriculum, and working with VentureWell, which is a nonprofit organization that helps manages the national programs. So it's an interdisciplinary group, and the focus has been, how do we take what NSF has developed, which typically focuses on engineering types of problems, and develop a program specifically that's going to be relevant to investigators in life sciences. And so the goals of our program have been, 1, to develop the curriculum specifically for life sciences, design the materials for students in the teaching team so we can actually expand this across the CTSA network, and then deliver programs locally through the CTSAs, and then develop our own National Innovation Network using the CTSAs as what NSF has called the sites, and then supported by these nodes that can help deliver the curriculum. And so the goal of the I-Core and NCATS program is really, how can we help diffuse this type of training to every single CTSA so we fill in that translational spectrum, not just doing science right, but also doing science with greater impact. And so the first step, if you come to an I-Core program, is we teach you how to do something called a business thesis or a value proposition. The first step is to actually, take a different lens from looking at your science and to try and identify who is your customer or your beneficiary, what is your product or breakthrough idea or solution, and why would they actually care? And it's interesting that this is actually quite difficult to do. And because we think about the scientific value of our research, but we don't really think about it from the perspective, who are the people that we're actually trying to help here? So here's an example. This is an invention that came out of UAB. So the problem, patients that have to actually go through and get a stoma and use an ostomy bag, that one of the challenges is that the ostomy bags, when they don't work, it's pretty difficult for the patient, for the nurses, for the care of that patient. And so originally, we thought the plan would be to redesign the ostomy bag, but as we sent a team in to really dig in and discover more about the problem, what they discovered is it's not the bag that's the problem, but it's actually the creation of the stoma. So when physicians, surgeons go in and create the stoma, they fold over the intestine, and there isn't a lot of uniformity in the procedure. And so even though best practice states that the stoma should be of a specific height, in practice that rarely happens. So the invention they came up with is actually a stoma stent. And so it's a medical device that you build into the stoma to give it structural tension and also give it a specific height. So here we have this great invention. It seems logical if we just toss a bunch of money at it and let some time go by, then this is going to be the standard in patient care. But is that really going to happen? So I want you to take a few minutes and see if you can actually come up with the business thesis for this discovery. Who is the customer of a stoma stent? Or who is the customer? The product is this stoma stent. And then why do they actually care? So take a minute with the people around you and see if you can actually come up with some answers to this. Yeah, so give it another 30 seconds. Let people think through. And yes, you have to participate. All right, so let's give it a try. All right, so customer is an insurance company. The value, why do they care whether or not the patient has more problems? Okay, so better health. What about reduced cost? Okay, so insurance companies want physicians to adopt a stomach to have better health outcomes that reduce costs. What else? Okay. What other customers? It's Friday afternoon. All right, so UAB says patients. All right, and why would they care? So patients would prefer a stomach because it works better. And working better, by the way, means a much higher quality of life. All right. So do patients get to decide what kind of care they get? Who's going to be the actual user of this device? What kind of doctors? The surgeons doing the ostomies. And what is the value proposition to them? So why would a surgeon adopt a new technique? Better patient outcomes? Ah, is it actually easier to do? So when you think about, you know, the physicians or the users of the technology, you're going to have to change how they're solving this problem now. And so, to what extent is it going to make their job easier, make their pain go away, or help them achieve their dreams of something like better patient outcomes? All right, so do doctors, surgeons get to select what kind of technology they use in the hospital?
Hospitals. Hospitals.
So who in hospitals? So hospitals are a building. Customers are real people. How about the administrators? And what's important to them?
Money.
Better care,
Care.
saving money. Oh, very good.
Very good. Very good.
Patient satisfaction. Hospital administrators care. Say more about that. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So this is why commercialization in life sciences is just so much more complicated. Because when you dig down into what is the value proposition, what you find is you actually have different customer types that all have an influence on how you would actually bring a discovery to market. So you have a decision maker, so someone who decides to adopt the technology. That could be the user, which is the surgeon, or it could be an administrator that mandates that we're going to start using this, or a health insurance company. Who is the decision maker that's going to be able to decide whether or not your technology gets adopted in their health system? You have an economic buyer. This is the person that's actually willing to write a check. This could be different from the surgeon, it could be different from the patient who is the beneficiary of the technology, but not necessarily who's going to pay. So who is the economic buyer? Is that going to be reimbursable by insurance, where insurance is the buyer? Or is that a cost that's going to have to be incurred by the hospital? These things all have an impact on how you would actually bring your innovation to the marketplace. Who are the influencers? So most hospital systems will actually have some kind of committee that does a review and influences whether or not something gets adopted or not. Who influences the physicians, the surgeons? Is it other surgeons saying, hey, I adopted this and it's the coolest thing? Is it our academic medical journals where they've read about this procedure? But how do you actually get the influencers on board as well? The end users, so who actually is going to use the technology? Are there any early evangelists? So people who love what you're doing so much, they're willing to go out and advocate for a change in the process. And of course, don't forget the saboteur. Who is out there that is currently solving this problem that doesn't want to get displaced? Is there anybody out there that doesn't want to see you be successful? And so, a saboteur, maybe that is the surgeon. So if I'm a very respected high-level surgeon, I've been doing ostomies for years and years, I don't need somebody to tell me how to change my procedure. I already know the best way to do it. So lots of different customer types within the health sciences ecosystem that you actually have to consider when you consider about commercialization. So when you think about business to life sciences, it's just more complicated. It's a lot more complicated than just introducing a new app that is adopted by users. Bird is a good example. So I don't know if you guys have been infiltrated by the Bird scooters yet, but talk about a business model. They drop in the scooters into a town, see how they're used, and then they decide whether or not they're going to keep them there or move somewhere else. Life sciences is just a lot harder. So of course you have the surgeons, physicians. Typically they're going to be a user or a decision maker. You have a patient that may or may not have any influence over the decisions. So, a patient could suggest to your physician that this is how I want to be treated, whether or not the physician's willing to go along with that. You're not just ill, you're deluded. We also have governing bodies and regulations that we have to comply with. And so there's another customer type stakeholder group that we have to consider before we can bring any type of innovation into a hospital system. We also have things like insurance companies. Are they going to be the payer? How are they going to influence you in this ecosystem? And of course we have administrators. So this just makes the context really, really complicated for any innovations in life sciences. So what we're trying to do with I-Core is we don't take your technology and go out and answer these questions. We try to help you guys, as physician researchers, answer these questions for yourself. So as long as we're sitting in our labs doing our research, then we're not getting these types of answers. We're not going out and actually talking to customers to know what they want. And so here's an example from one of the I-Core teams from Auburn University that came through the program last year. So super smart scientist, his name is Alan David. He actually is an engineer, and he has this really cool technology. He works with nanoparticles, and he had this idea. He can create these self-assembling nanosystems that he can use in theranostics. That's how we describe his project when he came into the program. Of course, the first thing that we made him do is come up with this business thesis. Who is your customer? What is your product? Why do they care? So their first stab at this is the customer is actually an MRI center. The product is a contrast agent. So just even understanding what the science will actually do in a context. And why do the radiologists, or why do the MRI centers care? Because they get better results. So we work with you to refine this. So an MRI center, once I always mention this, a hospital, those are buildings. Those are not customers. Those are not people. Who is the person inside of that building that cares about what you do and why? And so they said, well, it's better than what they're doing now. What does better actually mean from their point of view? And so they said, well, better means they have higher quality images. So the cool thing about this is that, all right, so here they have a customer, radiologists want contrast agents that produce better results. That is a hypothesis that you can actually go test. And so it's really the scientific method applied to startup companies. The next thing we do in I-Core is we use a tool called the Business Model Canvas. So if you look at a business model, it basically defines three things for you. How do you create value? How do you deliver value? And how do you capture value? So here are the 9 boxes that are the building components of every single business model. So first of all, who are your customers? And can you connect that to a value proposition? So that's what we've been talking about. Radiologists are my customers, and the value proposition, higher quality images. So the first step is to actually validate that hypothesis. Can you connect those 2 boxes by collecting the data you need to see whether or not that's a true assumption? Once you've validated that, then you have to figure out, how am I going to develop relationships with these customers? How am I actually going to deliver my products and services to them? And then how am I going to make money doing that? What are the revenue streams? So these are the right side of your canvas. These are your customer-facing activities. The left side of the canvas is all the back office stuff that you also have to do. So how do you create the value? What are the key activities that you need to engage in? What are the key resources you're going to need to actually accomplish those activities? Can you partner with somebody so you don't have to do everything internally? And then what is that going to cost you? And the goal, of course, is that hopefully your revenue stream is going to be greater than your cost of actually delivering that value. So the reason we picked the business model canvas as the structure is that it's very easy to quickly write down hypotheses on this, test them, and then pivot and change. So what you probably have been told in the past is you need to start with a really long business plan. So a 40-page business plan, and then you go pitch it to investors, and then you get a ton of money. The problem with that method is as soon as that business plan actually meets a customer, it falls apart. So this is a tool that helps you collect the information. You're trying to discover if you have a business model. The business plan comes after you've already verified your business model. So it's a tool that is more appropriate for this stage in the game. And one of the things I get from researchers all the time, well, my customer is NIH. So NIH is not your customer. A customer is somebody that is going to make your research sustainable by purchasing the products or service at the outcome. Well, all I need is FDA approval. If I can just get FDA approval, then money's going to start raining down on me. Also not true. All I need is funding so I can build my prototype. You know, just give me a pilot, give me an SBIR. So the truth is, these things are all key activities and key resources. Yes, you need financial resources. Yes, you need FDA approval, but that is the backside. Those are things that you have to do. But we know how to do these things. We know how to get funding from NIH. We know how to go through the FDA approval process. What we want to do is get you to start on the right side of the canvas, because this is the big unknown. If you actually go through all of the pain and torture of trying to get FDA funding and an SBIR, are you positive that you have a market and a pathway to get your discovery to a customer? That is the purpose of I-Corps. Can you validate the market value of your idea before you build it? So, how do you validate? You actually have to get out of the lab and go talk to customers. So yes, you can say, well, our technology transfer office will give us a market report, or I can Google it and get some numbers. I can go to our I2B2, see how many patients actually have this affliction, but that still doesn't give you the answer. Radiologists will adopt an MRI contrast agent that gives higher quality results. So Alan and his team actually got out of the lab and talked to 30 different radiologists, and guess what they discovered? Radiologists didn't care about this at all. So, of course, it is incredibly frustrating for a researcher to actually hear from who they think their beneficiary and user is going to be, that they're working on a problem that doesn't actually solve something for their customer base. But what they did learn is what keeps a radiologist up at night is not the quality of the images. They think the quality is good enough. But what they are really worried about is the safety and comfort of the patient. And so some patients, you can't even use contrast agents because they're too toxic, too painful. And so from the radiologist perspective, they really want safer MRI contrast agents. So, which was actually pretty cool. So Alan came back and he's like, yeah, I'm pretty depressed. I'm working on the wrong problem. But you know what? I was working on safety about 2 or 3 years ago. And now we know how we can pivot. So is it possible to introduce safer agents with high quality results? And so, even if they didn't move on towards actually forming a company and commercializing, that it has changed Alan's approach to how he does research. And so it just makes our researchers better researchers. The other thing I get, if you look at that very frustrated researcher, clinical physician, is you want me to get out of my lab? You want me to go talk to 30 people? Are you insane? That we haven't developed physician scientists that are comfortable actually going out and talking to people. This is another skill set that we really need to think about, and it's a lot of fun. So we're not asking people to go out and sell their idea to a customer. We're asking them to go out and discover what problems customers have. And so when you do interviews with radiologists, you don't say, hey, I've got this contrast agent, don't you want to buy it? You go and you say, so tell me about how you solve this problem now. What do you like about it? How can it be improved? What keeps you up at night? So you're on a journey of discovery of what's really important to the customers that you believe care about your science. And so for me, one of the most striking things about seeing teams go through this I-Corps process is the change in mindset. And, is our goal to try and make every researcher, an entrepreneur? No, but it does make them better researchers. And so this is the heart of what NSF and NIH want to accomplish. Can we teach our academic researchers to better understand the commercial potential of their research? And it starts by getting the input of the user as you're designing your research study. The other thing that we've found is people that have gone through the I-Core process actually write much better grades. And so instead of talking about the broader impacts in very nebulous terms, or this is important research because I read it in this many PubMed abstracts, they can actually point to, well, I've done interviews with 40 different radiologists, and this is something that's consistently, that I consistently hear. And keep in mind, these interviews also are your potential customers. And so getting comfortable getting out there and talking to them now, especially identifying the ones that are super excited, those are the ones that are going to come on to be your early evangelists. So in the end, going through an I-Core program helps give you another lens through which to view your research, and in my opinion, actually helps us create what I call the T-shaped scientist, translational scientists. People that can look at their science from a very deep perspective, so what they're doing in the lab, but also conversational to other types of people, potential users, potential beneficiaries. How do physicians solve this now? How does a hospital system work? What I've noticed working with a lot of teams is our research scientists have never actually seen a procurement process in a health system. And so it just opens up their perspective of how their research would translate from campus into a health system. So if you're interested and want to participate, or you have physician scientists that have great ideas, then we are now teaching the different regional programs. So in July, UAB co-hosted with Emory a regional program. We had about 16 teams go through the program. August, Miami had their regional program. Coming up now is UC Davis. And then in October, we'll have one at UMass, and then we're going to have one at Penn State. So these are programs that are open to anybody in the CTSA network, and if you want to learn more, I highly recommend you sign up. So why do we think this is critical for the CTSA? Well, first of all, it will help us identify what are some of the great ideas that we have in the CTSA network coming out of research that we can help accelerate towards commercialization. Can we elevate any of these into a national program, into an SBIR program, that our individual institutions have the best view on that? The second thing is getting access to customers to interview. So when we're talking about life sciences, we're talking about surgeons who do, different types of procedures, or radiologists. These people are incredibly difficult to interview. You can't just cold call them and say, hey, tell me about what you hate about your job, because they're not likely to be open and forthcoming about that. With the CTSA network and our academic medical centers, we can help kind of ease the rails to get people to interview, at least pick up the phone. We are not going to be able to solve some of the difficult problems in our health systems unless we actually have people willing to share what the problems are with people that have the potential to solve them. We've got to start developing that culture. And of course, we want more teams to participate in I-Core so we can elevate them to a national level. So that's it for me. Do you guys have any questions? And if you're interested in a regional, if you go to the UAB CCTS website and put in I-Core, we have the schedule for all of the regional programs. That is a great question. So the regional programs, they're 5 weeks long. The expectation is that you will do 30 interviews with your target customer and then present back what you've learned. So realistic time commitment is about 10 hours a week. Most of that in the beginning weeks is actually lining up interviews, and then you're going to have to pivot because you're going to talk to people who say, well, I'm not the right person. So it's going to take a week or two to actually figure out what is the right customer segment for you. So the point of a regional program is to prepare you for a national program. We don't replicate the national program, and we don't have the same requirements for team structure. Anybody can come in as a team. So we have teams that are doctoral students that included undergraduate students. Sometimes the PI showed up, sometimes they didn't. That we're very flexible about what we accept into regional programs. But the goal is to introduce you to this idea of customer discovery, how to use a business model canvas, and actually how to go out and get interviews to collect the data that you need. Teams that are successful in the regional program that want to continue will be eligible to go to a national program. So the national program is 7 weeks. You get $50,000. That money is specifically for customer discovery, trying to verify the market potential. And so you can use the money to go to things like conferences, to get interviews, to travel to other CTSA institutions, but they want you to focus that funding on the market potential, which is very different from the SBIR funding, which they want you to spend on R&D. So it's a nice complement. At a national program, 7 weeks, the expectation is 100 interviews. So you really need to go into a national program pretty well prepared. And the other thing, with the regional program, we want you guys to be exposed and to learn. The national program, they really want to push you towards deciding whether or not this is a go or no-go decision at the end of 7 weeks. And of course, for the SBIRs that are eligible for the national program, there's that extra, component to it for your funding to be able to continue in the SBIR program. So did that answer your question? Good question. So week 1, we have a 1-day kickoff, and that is face-to-face. So you will fly to the regional program, and I strongly recommend, if you can, stay an extra day and actually do interviews in that context and see another academic medical center while you're there. So face-to-face the first day. Week 2, you just have 30 minutes of office hours with somebody on the teaching team. So those are virtual, and you set that up individually between a person on the teaching team and your team. And it's a check-in to be able to see how you're doing in the interviews and to give you guidance. Week 3, we have a WebEx. So it is a 2-hour commitment. On one of the days, it's specific, it's synchronous, even though we're not co-located. So the teams will present on week 3 what their progress has been. They'll get feedback from the teaching team. Week 4, office hours again that you schedule with the teaching team. And then week 5, we get back together for a face-to-face finale. So, which is, a really good question. We designed the program specifically for incredibly busy physician scientists and academic medical centers. We realize that they don't have a commitment, aren't able to make such a huge commitment of being able to get somewhere face-to-face. So this combination of some face-to-face with online check-ins in between seems to work very well in our context. Other questions? So I want to challenge everybody out there to send a team to one of the upcoming regionals and actually go yourself with your team and see the process and be able to bring it back to your institution, because truly, having seen the teams go through this process, it is truly an experiential component to their learning that I think really develops these skills of translational thinking. Sure. So going back to the business model canvas, a patent is a key activity that you have to do. And so, it can be pre or post patent What you want to be careful about, though, is how you talk about your technology. So, this program, what we're trying to do is you're trying to discover from users what they need. We want you to have the technology, stick it in the box, stick it under the bed. We don't want you talking about the technology at all. You can talk about the general space. Oh, we're looking at a way to improve the ostomy process. But we want you to get used to this skill set of being able to talk to people about how to solve problems without specifically talking about your technology. So we are focused on this customer-facing side in I-Core. Patenting is something you will do at your institution, and typically it's a key activity that you have pretty well-defined processes for at your institution. For me personally, if you're going to go through the cost of a patent, you want to be pretty confident that you have a market. So if you are successful, how would you actually get it into the hands, and how would you create a business model around it to sustain it? So I think they both they're complementary. And once again, it's a change in mindset. It's a way to look at your research from a different lens. I need to get the statistic, but the number of different technologies that have gone through FDA approval but actually have no market success is pretty high. So what we want to try and do is, are we certain that there's a market before we go through the entire process of FDA approval? So once that happens, we know how to actually get it out there. So I talked about the research method and the scientific method. Yes, in order to get FDA approval, we have to do experiments and we have to do clinical trials that collect a specific set of data that the FDA wants to see. But we also need this other kind of data about the market. If I actually get this approved as a device, are the patients actually going to use it? Are they going to comply? Are the physicians willing to change their current standard of care to be able to integrate it? Is insurance going to be willing to pay for it? Are they going to be willing to reimburse it at a level that makes it commercializable? So you need two different types of data to be able to answer these kinds of questions. Other questions? Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, second call to action. So first, send a team to a regional. Second, if you get a call from somebody that's on an I-Core team and they're requesting an interview, encourage everybody in your institution to say yes.